My dearest wish was to be with him at the end of his life, and that was denied me because of the law.
Good evening. There is, the Bible tells us, a time to be born and a time to die. We have no control over the first, but ought we to have at least some control over the second? Today a campaign began which could result in us being able to choose to end our own lives. The Labour MP Roland Boys, who has painful memories of his mother's death, today put down an early day motion in the Commons calling on the government to allow voluntary euthanasia. That motion, incidentally, is a way of testing how much support there might be from other MPs. Mr. Boys wants Britain to follow the example of Holland, where a doctor may, under very strict guidelines, end the life of a terminally ill patient without fear of prosecution. Some doctors here say whatever the guidelines, that is fundamentally wrong and open to abuse. Dr. Adrian Rogers is one of those, a leading campaigner against voluntary euthanasia, and he's our special guest tonight. Others believe we should have the chance to exercise what they would say is the last act of love. Philip Tibbenham reports.
40 years ago, Gwendolyn Pry moved to the isolation of the Gloucestershire countryside with her husband, Charles. Then he was a fit man. It didn't occur to either of them that he would be struck by ill health.
I had the house to care for. I'd never had a home to care for before, you see. So we were very happy and very much in tune. He had his garden and he just spent most of his day out there. And he was very happy doing it. When masses of flowers all down the side, he grew those for me. And it was a perfect existence for the people we were.
But slowly, Charles developed acute arthritis and later cancer. The pain drove him to make 4 attempts on his own life.
Did it occur to you to help him in some way, if you could?
Oh, I pleaded. All the time, I constantly pleaded with him. I would say to him, let me help you. I'm sure I can get away with it. But no, he wouldn't hear of it. I said, look, I can act quite well. I can convince people that you did it on your own, that I had nothing to do with it. No, he would not hear of it. I said, let's go together. Let us go together. I don't want to live without you. And he wouldn't hear of that either. So I more or less gave up on it. Anyway, it got so bad that about 2 nights before he died, he was in dreadful pain. The tears were running down his face at night when I went to say goodnight to him. And I said to him, this can't go on, Charles, can it? And he said, oh. Anyway, he seemed to buck up. The next day, he seemed more or less normal, as far as you could say normal. And that night, I'd been watching Dave Allen on my own down here, and I was so amused by this program that I went upstairs and I went through the whole show of Dave Allen's sketches with him and made him laugh too. And we had a real good laugh on our last night, thanks to Dave Allen. Well, the next morning, I got up and I gave him his breakfast and I was off to Stroud to do a bit of shopping. So I went up and kissed him goodbye. He was out of bed, standing by his chest of drawers, and I put my arms around him and we hugged each other. And I said, you will be all right, won't you? I'll be back as quick as I can. I'm going to have a taxi back. Oh yes, I should be all right, he said.
She didn't see Charles alive again.
He left this note on the side. The note said, my darling Gwen, this to end the constant pain. Thank you for all your love and kindness. Take care of yourself. Goodbye, all my love, Charles. And 6 kisses. Very badly written, obviously written under great stress. I would have liked the doctor to have been able to end it for him, which is what he would have liked. what he really would have wanted. He would not have wanted to commit suicide. He was not that sort of man. He did it because he had no alternative under the law.
These people are on their way to Parliament to launch a campaign aimed at changing the law on euthanasia. John Oliver and Jean Davis are leaders of the Voluntary Euthanasia Society. They argue that it's time doctors here were allowed to end the life of a terminally ill patient who's expressed a clear wish not to have a lingering death.
Well, if you remember last time, we drew attention to the public opinion poll, which said that 75% of those surveyed were in favour of voluntary euthanasia. Probably still.
They're here to help Roland Boys, MP, draft today's early day motion calling for the legalisation of voluntary euthanasia.
75%
of the population.
That's right.
20 years ago, Mr. Boys had to watch his mother suffer a distressing death.
The whole experience was a thing that affected me very, very deeply. I had tremendous affection and love for my mother. A love that I'm becoming more conscious of now, 20 odd years later. I find I'm talking about her in speeches and things, where it's all a result of that terrible experience of being in the room the moment she died and so on. I don't know if you have ever been in such a situation, but it's not very pleasant, and it affected me in a peculiar way. Every day that I drove to work, it was as though there was a video in my brain, and for a year, every morning, even though I was trying to stop it, it clicked into gear, and those minutes as she died went through my brain.
Joan Hart once had one of the best-known voices in the country.
I knew you for what you were the moment I saw you. Mad, bad, and dangerous to know.
As an actress, she was regularly heard in radio drama just after the war, but her voice was silenced 6 years ago after she'd contracted cancer. When she died, her husband, Dawson Jackson, was at her side. He nursed Joan through her last painful weeks. He says she wanted him to end her misery.
It was a marvellous time. I had our friends in, one or two at a time, every day. They filled this room with flowers, which she particularly loved. And she was able to say goodbye to them, one after another. And it's a wonderful thing to know your life is ending and to be able to give it a proper close. But it came to a time when she was so weak. She was sleeping there and I was sleeping on the floor, so I was with her all the time. And one morning she said she got so weak that she couldn't turn over without me helping her over. She said in a perfectly matter-of-fact voice, a kind of matter-of-fact way which you know is serious. She said, well, thank you, that's enough.
When your wife said, that's enough, you took that to mean she wanted to die?
I took it, yes, and she wanted to die. She had enough of this life.
And had she told you what you were to do?
No. I had taken enough time out to think of what I would do if she got to that point. And I felt I'd have no hesitation in doing it, although of course it would be difficult because one's never done anything like that in one's life before. You don't know how to help people to die unless you've had time to think about it and to consult people. And I had for those 3 months been with her day and night, and I hadn't had an opportunity to do that sort of thing or to go to libraries and read things up. So I knew it would be difficult. But I felt I'd have no hesitation in doing what she wanted. It would be my most obvious duty.
And did you in fact kill your wife?
Well, I think I leave that to you to decide. You know how I felt. You have met myself. You can decide whether I was too cowardly or too confused or not.
I know you don't want to incriminate yourself, but do you have any regrets about the way she died?
Oh, none whatever. Only one, and that is that the law didn't allow me to have a doctor by to prevent anything going wrong and to see that it was an easy death. That would have been lovely.
Dawson Jackson is right to be concerned about incriminating himself. As the law stands, mercy killing can be held to be murder, carrying severe penalties.
This is Wakefield Prison, where some of the IRA's most dangerous men are held. And so is Tony Cocker. Who, you say, is Tony Cocker? Well, he's a man of 55 who killed his wife. She'd been suffering from a wasting disease, and I think some of us would have called it a mercy killing. But when the case came to trial at Manchester Crown Court the year before last, the judge ruled that a plea of guilty to manslaughter could not go to the jury because it hadn't been established that Cocker had been provoked. His counsel was more or less obliged to enter a plea of guilty to a murder charge. Consequently, Tony Cocker is serving a life sentence here at Wakefield.
The jury in Tony Cocker's case were so disturbed that 11 of them wrote a letter of protest to the trial judge. But it did no good. Nor did an appeal to the High Court. The Lord Chief Justice, Lord Lane, said that although this case was tragic, Cocker had no right to kill his wife.
She was in a wheelchair. She was doubly incontinent. Her speech was slurred. She was very anxious not to go into an institution. She was unable to talk about her wish to die to anyone except her husband, and the form that took was asking him constantly to end her life, which he was most reluctant to do.
What actually happened on the day that she died, when he killed her?
It was January the 2nd, the day after New Year's Eve in 1988, and they hadn't got to sleep until 2:30 or so. And early in the morning, he described it in court that he was woken by her pawing at his back and waking him up and demanding again that he should end her life. And he put his hands round her throat, and she put her hands on top of his and said, "Don't stop." But he couldn't bear to see her face, so he took his hands away and put a pillow over her face, and she died very quickly.
We'll never know how many doctors have covertly practiced euthanasia in the past, but the British Medical Association has ruled firmly that there are no circumstances which justify the taking of a life by a doctor. Dr. Stephen Henderson-Smith is one of the few GPs who's prepared to challenge that ruling. He certainly helped at least one man to end his own life.
The man who came to my surgery, who I didn't know before then at all, and he said he'd been reading my articles in the paper about this, and he said, could I help him to die? I had a good look at him. He told me that he'd been under the doctors, coughing and spluttering and unable to breathe, possibly. Everything had been done that could be done. He said, "Doctor, can you tell me how many tablets I could take to be quite sure that I didn't wake up again?" I felt this was a rather risky position, but I did write 3-0 on a piece of paper and gave it to him. And the week afterwards, his name was amongst the recently dying in the community.
Other doctors believe passionately that there is a different and a more dignified way of death. In the expanding hospice movement, terminally ill patients are helped to come to terms with approaching death once their pain has been made more bearable. Here, say the doctors, there's no wish to hasten the end.
Really, life is very precious. They want to live. They want to be made comfortable. Once they've been made comfortable, they want to go on living and living as long as possible.
There is now, of course, a disease which often doesn't allow its victims even to reach old age. For 30 shining seconds on network news, Shane Snape became the most celebrated person with AIDS in Britain. As a nurse, Shane had to watch others die. Now he's made plans for his own inevitable end.
I'm a type of person who's actually decided how I want to live my life, and I also want to decide how I want to end my life. I don't want to be dependent on people. And for me, the hardest part is not actual dying, it's the actual living with the fear of what it's going to do to my family. I love my family, I care for them, and I don't want them to go through what I've seen other parents go through. And I actually do want, at the end of my life, to end it pretty quickly.
Have you reached a decision as to how you would want that to happen?
Well, I'm caught in a dilemma, because the ideal death for me would be like a Hollywood movie, where Bette Davis is in bed and all the relatives around and I say something nice to everybody, and then eventually I close my eyes and sleep. Now, that sounds glamorous and everything, but the reality is it could happen with voluntary euthanasia. But by the fact that that would happen with my parents there and relatives around with me, that puts a burden on them, and legally complications would set in. So I've decided that when I feel it's right for me, then nobody can be with me in order to protect them, and so I'll probably die alone.
My dearest wish was to be with him at the end of his life, and that was denied me because of the law. You see, if euthanasia had been, voluntary euthanasia had been legal, we could have had 2 doctors and a priest, and I could have held his hand, and he would have died happy instead of in the turmoil that he must have died in. The despair of spirit that he must have died in. You understand?
Dr. Rogers, it's impossible not to be moved by that. Do you understand?
These are sad cases, they're powerful arguments, but we're talking about changing a law, and there are far more powerful arguments why we should not legalize euthanasia.
You would not have accepted euthanasia in any of those cases we've just seen?
I wouldn't want to judge personally those cases because many of the facts aren't here, and we aren't here to go into those cases.
Well, you've heard each of the individuals say they would have chosen euthanasia.
I think they'd be wrong, and they'd be paving the way for further wrongness, because the major fact about euthanasia is it is the last resort of an uncaring society. Because if you really provide the alternative, which is adequate care, and that's what the hospice movement does, and they do it wonderfully well, people don't want euthanasia, and they can have a dignified death and also sometimes a beautiful death. But even that is perhaps not the main argument, because the main argument is that the possibilities are opened up for wide abuse.
Let's follow that argument up. John Oliver, you're the General Secretary of the Voluntary Euthanasia Society. Widespread abuse, that must be a danger, must it not?
I think it's important to realise to begin with that the society was set up by a group of very eminent doctors in 1935. And indeed, we have many doctors in our ranks and nurses today. Now,
but many are against it.
Many are against it, certainly. But the last opinion poll suggested that 45% of doctors would seriously consider practicing euthanasia if it were legal.
But that leaves more than half who would not. And the argument is that you are opening up the possibility of widespread abuse.
Well, it would be unthinkable to introduce legislation without appropriate safeguards to prevent abuse. And I would suggest those safeguards would closely mirror the safeguards or guidelines that are now in use in Holland.
And they're briefly what?
Well, essentially to make sure the decision is a settled one and has been arrived at without any pressure from outside, either real or imagined.
Even with those guidelines, we have more than 10,000 people in Holland who have opted for voluntary euthanasia. That's a very high figure, isn't it? Are you quite sure that in none of those cases can the guidelines have been broken?
Well, I can't be certain. But one must realise also that in this country there is very strong anecdotal evidence, and indeed this is acknowledged by the BMA, that euthanasia active euthanasia is being practiced by doctors in this country now without any guidelines whatsoever.
What about the hospice movement, though? That is an alternative. Dr. Higgins, the people in your hospice opt not for euthanasia, but for a different sort of slow death?
Well, we can't always decide what sort of death our patients will have. I must admit, I think from having seen the film and the situations various people have found themselves in, I feel great empathy with them. But it also highlights, I think, to me, that there is a great need for an alternative care that will, in fact, meet the needs of these people whose suffering is enormous.
Because there aren't at the moment enough hospices,
There aren't enough hospices. The hospice, in fact, directs its attention to seeking out the terrible distress that the pain, the physical pain, the emotional pain, the social pain, the spiritual pain that these people are, in fact, having to bear. And that by being able to identify what causes their pain, giving them time to sort through their emotions, to help their families to come to an understanding of what's happening to them, then their suffering can be relieved.
Mrs. Pride, if you'd had the option of a hospice, would you have chosen it for your husband, or would he have chosen it?
No, because I consider that the hospice movement is excellent as an alternative, but it is euthanasia in slow motion. It is a slow, drawn-out death with painkillers and all the rest of it. It's the same thing in the end. If you wanted long, drawn-out death, take the hospice movement. Otherwise, let's have voluntary euthanasia. Let us have the right to mercy.
Dawson Jackson.
It could hardly be said that my wife was suffering from being in an uncaring society. She died at home with me. It could not have happened better. And I find it, I'm afraid, absurd to suggest that she could have died better if her death had been prolonged than if it had been short.
Dr. Rogers.
Can I take issue here? Because a patient that has lived with me daily is a wonderful man who cared for his wife with this awful wasting disease. And he became virtually the lungs and the feeding system for this woman. The day before she died, she was absolutely immobile. She couldn't work anything. All she could use was one of these little tiny typewriters by using a mouthpiece. She was on the brink of death for weeks.
And was she in great pain?
She wasn't in pain. They enjoyed their last few days, and she died very, very quickly one morning when he was helping her.
But isn't this the point? Had she been in enormous pain and saw no way out of it, was totally immobile, as you say, totally dependent on others, and had chosen euthanasia, how could you have refused it?
Well, the two cases are so different. We're talking in one case about a person who becomes extremely dependent and they're not in pain. They, I have proven to you, can survive with care.
But I don't think anybody's suggesting there ought to be voluntary euthanasia for those people.
Well, Mr. Jackson seems to have already carried it out. But
his wife was in great pain.
She need not have been in pain. Ask the hospice movement. People do not need to be in pain. And one of the greatest misunderstandings is about the very nature of death itself.
But in many cases, surely you cannot do anything for the pain.
Oh, no. No, no. That really is a terrible misnomer. And
well, do you accept that, Dr. Henderson-Smith? Do you accept that there are cases where you can do something about pain, or do you accept what Dr. Rogers says, that in all cases you can do something about the pain?
It's not just pain. There's wasting diseases, breathlessness, fouling of the bed, and all these sort of things are completely undignified for a person to go through. And there's no point in all this. If euthanasia legislation were introduced, then people could opt either for hospice or for euthanasia, one or the other.
Shane Snape, you have opted for euthanasia. You are going to kill yourself. Isn't that going to cause enormous distress to your parents when you finally do that?
Well, I'm glad we're actually talking about distress, because at the moment we're talking about physical things, pain as being a physical thing. But the mental pain I'm actually going through while I'm actually well and living with my disease, is actually the problem. What I want at the end of the day is if I could actually have voluntary euthanasia, then that would make it okay for my family to be with me, which is what I want. I don't want to be where somebody's to come along and feed me and it dribbles down my face. Now, hospices are fantastic places, but sometimes we cannot actually, you know, reverse processes. I don't want somebody having to take control of my life. I don't want the anguish of my family having to witness their son going through this. I love my parents and I love my family and I'm so close to them. I want to spare that for them. Now that sounds an ideal thing, but at the end of the day, my life has stopped when I'm dribbling. My life has stopped when somebody is to come along and turn me. If we just actually look at nursing practice, and one of the things that we don't actually think things through is a lot of the time is, what are we doing? If the patient is actually dying, and we know sometimes that a patient might be expected to die within the next 3 hours, healthcare workers may still come in and turn that patient. Why? And they'll say we don't want them to get pressure sores. Basically because the healthcare worker hasn't thought their own process of death, what it means to them. Now if that patient was a dog, if that dog was dying and looked comfortable, you'd stay with it and you'd wait. You wouldn't put them through this extra pain. So that's why I've actually chose euthanasia for myself.
And what are you going to do?
I'm going to take tablets. Now, the problem with that is certain medications make you convulse. Certain medications can make your death be 24 hours, 48 hours. If voluntary euthanasia was there, it would save the problem. I'd have a doctor on hand to actually monitor that my death was dignified and that I didn't die alone. There will be somebody with me. As the law stands now, it says I've got to die alone. Otherwise, my family will be incriminated. I've seen 22 of my friends die. Now, initially, I thought I wanted euthanasia. Now, after seeing 22 of my friends die, some of them in hospice care, what was marvellous, I know I've come to the right decision for myself. If we look back at the Second World War, what actually happened there? We give secret agents cyanide tablets and said, if you believe the going got too tough, end your life. And that was fine for them. In some cases, they didn't even have a choice. Other people took it on themselves to think, I can't let them go through that. What I'm actually asking for is, if we look at the hospice movement or any care for a patient, we've got to admit we do not get it right all the times. Perhaps, and what I'm asking for is, let me decide, then I might get it right for myself.
Thank you very much indeed. From Family Matters for this week, good night.
Tomorrow morning, Open Air will be discussing the case for and against euthanasia with John Humphrys. If you have a comment, ring 061 814 0424 with your views. The lines are open now.